Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hi there, Herman and Corin. So I've mentioned in a few episodes how I have this crazy home inventory system. It's called Homebox, or it's actually called Where My Stuff because I forked the project and it's a little kind of private spin-off. But basically it was built on Homebox, which is an open source inventory management system. And I'm looking now at a couple of tidbits that came in the post. What do we have in today's haul? First haul since Chinese New Year. Ah yes, a CPU bucket for the LGA 1700. Classic. And some other little things. Now this is pretty typical. I'll get a few very niche parts on AliExpress that I just can't find locally. I've learned from experience that the local market, there's some great hardware stores here, including my local David Castell in Jerusalem on Agrippa Street. Top hardware store. Highly recommend those guys. But there's just a level of specificity when you get down to computers that sometimes you know you're not going to find it, and it's just going to be it's just going to be a waste of time. So as much as I have misgivings about the sustainability aspect of importing stuff from China, sometimes it really is the most efficient way to get these niche parts. When I do, I take photographs of these exciting things. And that's actually what's become the most useful part of the inventory system. There's so many little niches and joins and screws and fittings that it would take you a lifetime to write down. And I found that my smartphone, to my surprise, OnePlus Nord 3 5G, is actually an outstanding. I've never seen a smartphone camera that does such good. It takes these amazing like you can literally zoom in on a printed circuit board or on a screw and capture those tiny details. So what I'm asking Herman and Corin is this system, as much as at times I've questioned my sanity for building it, by which I mean building up my inventory and sticking with it, believe me, it was an insane slog. It's proven its worth time and time again. The main reason actually for having it was you just get to those points in projects where you need a certain specific adapter, and a lot of my stuff is work related in the sense that as a digital consultant doing AI, a lot of AI work, arguably the stuff that I open source and play around with actually becomes client work. So it's kind of a hybrid system. And it's that stage where you get to the tail end of a project and you need that 632 UNC screw, or you need that monitor cable, that, obscure one. And before I had this, it would literally take me sometimes 30 minutes of rooting through boxes and boxes to try to figure out exactly where you put it in a bundle of 40 IKEA boxes. So it's a great system. And my only question with it now, Herman and Corin, I'm totally committed to maintaining it and to its value, is figuring out how to minimize the upkeep. By which I mean, when you're taking in new parts, for example, my CPU socket, for folks who do this in warehouses, or maybe this is even their full-time job, managing inventory, the amount of parts you can inventorize, like it would be, if I told someone I have about 5,000 parts in my home office, they'd say you're joking me, or maybe 3,000. But if I ran an export now, I'd probably get to a number like that. And it's all these tiny little screws and components, but it really adds up. But if you talk to someone who's managing a warehouse or a inventory system with 10,000 parts, presumably they have to have some pretty nifty systems for doing this important work of noting what you have, noting what you've discarded when you throw it out, noting where it is. I'm not talking about the specific inventory system, whether you're using something like SAP or you're using something open source like Homebox. But if you're at that level of scale, we're not talking about writing down where 10 photo albums are. You might be writing down where several thousand electronics repairs things are. The time saving is great, but you don't want to get to the point that maintaining or entering the new things that you might order is going to create a significant point of friction. So what are some tips, Herman and Corin? We always love to learn from the pros on this podcast, those who manage large inventories and do this kind of thing morning, noon and night every day of the week. What are some tips you think that we might be able to learn from them in how to actually do this well? For those over-tech home labbers like me who love having a home inventory, but we don't want to see our week drained by taking photos and entering it into a database, what are some tips, perhaps especially those that leverage AI, that might make the process that bit more seamless and straightforward? Herman and Corin, over to you.
You know, Herman, I was looking at that one shelf in the hallway yesterday. The one where you keep all the old power adapters and those random lengths of Ethernet cable, and I had this moment of pure existential dread. I realized that if I needed a specific 12-volt 2-amp center positive barrel jack, I would probably just buy a new one on the internet rather than spend 45 minutes digging through that box. It is a strange kind of paralysis where the abundance of resources actually makes you poorer because the cost of finding the resource is higher than the cost of just reacquiring it.
Herman Popplebear here, and Corn, that hurts. That box is not just a pile of junk, it is a carefully curated archive of mid-2000s power standards and the evolution of copper shielding. But I get it, truly. What you are describing is the friction of retrieval. In the world of logistics, we say that an item you cannot find is an item you do not own. The friction of finding something often outweighs the value of the object itself, which is the great tragedy of the modern tinkerer. We become curators of things we can never actually use because we cannot find them. We are essentially running a museum where the catalog has been lost and the lights are turned off.
It is the information retrieval problem applied to physical space, and that leads us perfectly into today's prompt from Daniel. He has been diving deep into this exact struggle. He uses a system called Homebox, or a fork of it he calls Where My Stuff, which is an open-source inventory management platform. He is tracking niche computer parts, components, even specific things like a CPU block for an LG A1700 socket he just got in the mail. But he is hitting a wall. Once you get to 3,000, 4,000, or 5,000 items, the upkeep becomes a full-time job. He wants to know how the pros do it, and how we can use artificial intelligence to stop the data entry from eating our lives. He is a digital consultant, so he knows the value of data, but he is drowning in the physical reality of it.
This is such a classic scaling problem. It is one thing to inventory your 5 favorite board games or your collection of vintage fountain pens. It is another thing entirely to manage a literal warehouse of microelectronics in a spare bedroom or a home office. Daniel mentioned he is taking photos with his phone, a OnePlus Nord, and that the macro shots are great, but the manual entry is the killer. And he is right. In professional logistics, we talk about the cost of a touch. Every time a human has to touch a piece of data or an object, the cost of maintaining that inventory goes up. If you have to touch an item 5 times between receiving it and shelving it, you have probably already spent more in labor than the item is worth.
I love that phrase, the cost of a touch. Let's do the math on Daniel's situation. If he has 5,000 items, and every time he buys a new pack of M3 screws or a voltage regulator, he has to open an app, take a photo, type in the dimensions, categorize it, and assign it a location, he is spending maybe 3 minutes per item. At 5,000 items, that is 15,000 minutes. That is 250 hours of pure data entry. If Daniel bills his time as a consultant at, say, $100 an hour, he has spent $25,000 worth of his life just telling a database that he owns some screws. That is not a hobby anymore. That is a grueling, unpaid part-time job.
Exactly. And the professionals, the people running actual warehouses or even high-end repair shops like the ones you see in Shenzhen, or even the specialized labs at MIT, they do not do it that way. They rely on systems of flow rather than systems of record. The first thing to understand is the difference between a flat list and a hierarchical location system. Daniel is using Homebox, which is great because it allows for nested locations. You have the office, then the shelf, then the bin, then the sub-bin. But the pro tip here is to decouple the item from the location in your mind and in your database.
What do you mean by that? If it is not in the bin, where is it?
I mean that the location should be a permanent address like a house number. Most hobbyists label a bin screws or capacitors. That is a mistake, because the moment you get more screws than fit in that bin, your system breaks. You have to relabel everything. The professional way is to use something called a license plate number, or LPN. Every container, every bin, every drawer gets a unique permanent barcode or QR code. You never ever change the label on the box. You only change what the database says is inside that box. This is how Amazon handles their chaotic storage. A bin might contain a book, a toaster, and a pack of AA batteries. The system knows they are there because the bin was scanned. Then the items were scanned into it.
That makes sense. It stops you from having to peel off old tape and write new labels every time you reorganize. You are just moving digital pointers. But Daniel's issue is the initial entry. He is getting these hauls from places like AliExpress or the local hardware store, like David Castell on Agrippa Street here in Jerusalem. If you have ever been there, it is this incredible cramped space where they have everything from 1950s plumbing fixtures to modern power tools. You walk out with a bag of 20 different things, and you have to get them into the system. How do the pros handle the high-volume intake without losing their minds?
They use batching and standardized attributes. If you look at how a professional parts distributor like DigiKey or Mouser works, they are not typing out descriptions. They are using OCR, which is optical character recognition, and pre-existing databases. For Daniel, the biggest leap forward in 2026 is leveraging multimodal artificial intelligence for automated tagging. We are at a point now with models like GPT-4o, Gemini 1.5 Pro, or even local models like Llama 3 Vision, where you can feed an image of a circuit board or a specific screw into an AI WIME, and it can identify the part, the thread pitch, or the manufacturer almost instantly.
Wait, can it really do that for niche parts? Like if I show an AI a picture of a random voltage regulator, can it actually tell me the part number?
If the marking is legible, absolutely. These models have been trained on millions of datasheets and product catalogs. They are shockingly good at reading tiny laser-etched serial numbers that the human eye struggles with. So, instead of Daniel typing out CPU block for LG A1700, he should be able to just snap a photo under a decent light, and the AI should extract the text from the packaging, categorize it under cooling components, and suggest tags like Intel, water cooling, and copper. It can even go out to the web, find the PDF of the manual, and attach a link to it in Homebox.
So the workflow changes from manual entry to verification. You are just hitting a confirm button instead of typing. That would cut the cost of a touchdown from minutes to seconds. But how does he integrate that with something like Homebox? Homebox is open source, but it does not have a native AI layer that just watches your camera.
Not natively, no, but because it is open source and has a robust API, a programming interface, you can build a bridge. Daniel is a consultant, he probably has some scripting skills. There are already projects on GitHub that act as an AI sidecar for home inventory. You point a folder of photos at the script, it sends them to an AI model via an API key, and it spits out a JSON file, which is a data format that Homebox can import. You could essentially process 100 items in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. You just lay them out on a white background, snap, 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 and let the script do the heavy lifting.
That is the dream. But let's talk about the physical side of this. Daniel mentioned he is using his phone camera. While phone cameras are great, especially with the macro lenses on something like his OnePlus, is there a better way for someone with thousands of parts? I am thinking about those handheld scanners you see in supermarkets, or those ruggedized tablets.
For a home labber, the phone is actually often better because of the screen real estate and the processing power. But the real pro move is dedicated labeling. If Daniel wants to manage 5,000 items, he needs a thermal label printer, something like a Brother QL800 or a Dymo label writer. These use heat instead of ink, so they never run out of toner. Every time a new item comes in, it gets a tiny QR code. That QR code is the digital twin of the physical object. If he ever needs to know what is in a bag or a box, he just points his phone at it, and the Homebox page for that item pops up instantly. No searching, no typing.
I think the QR code is the bridge between the digital and physical. But there is another problem with large inventories, the audit. Things get lost. You take a screw out, you forget to update the count. You move a cable to a different bin because you were in a rush, and you do not tell the app. Professional warehouses use something called cycle counting. Instead of doing a massive, soul-crushing audit of 5,000 items once a year, which takes an entire weekend and makes you want to quit the hobby, they count 5 items every single day.
Yes, cycle counting is a game changer for the psychology of organization. It turns a mountain into a series of molehills. If Daniel just makes it a habit that every time he opens a drawer to look for something, he verifies the count of one random item in that drawer, his database stays remarkably accurate over time. It is about building a low-friction habit. If the app makes it hard to update a count, you won't do it. But if you can just scan the QR code on the bin, hit a plus or minus button on your phone, and close the drawer, it takes 4 seconds.
So we have AI for intake, QR codes for retrieval, and cycle counting for accuracy. But what about the stuff that is too small to label? Daniel mentioned tiny screws and fittings. You cannot put a QR code on an M2 screw. It is physically impossible.
That is where you use the container as the proxy. This is a standard practice in hardware management. You label the bin and you use a scale. Professional inventory managers for small parts often use counting scales. You tell the scale that one screw weighs 0.5 grams, then you dump the whole bag in, and it tells you there are exactly 242 screws. If Daniel wants to get really nerdy, he can get a high-precision digital scale, one that goes down to the milligram, hook it up to his computer via USB, and update his homebox counts by weight. There are even plugins for some inventory systems that do the math for you. You put the bin on the scale, and it updates the database automatically.
That is next level. I can see Herman Poppleberry now, weighing his resistors to the nearest milligram. But honestly, it makes sense. If you are a digital consultant like Daniel, your time is literally money. Spending an hour counting screws is a net loss for your business. But I want to go back to the AI side, because I think there is a deeper implication here. We are moving toward a world where the inventory system could be passive.
You are talking about computer vision, aren't you?
Exactly. Imagine a camera mounted over Daniel's workbench. It uses a model like Segment Anything or a specialized vision transformer to watch what he is doing. It sees him pick up a specific CPU block and move it from the intake area to a specific bin. The AI recognizes the object, knows where it went because it sees the LPN on the bin, and updates the database without him ever touching a phone or a keyboard. We are seeing this in Amazon's Go stores and high-end manufacturing lines. For a home user in 2026, we might not be there yet for a $20 setup, but the building blocks are all there.
It is closer than you think. Even just using a tool like Lava, which is a vision language model you can run locally on a decent GPU, could allow Daniel to describe his inventory in natural language. He could say, I am putting the silver heatsink in the top drawer of the blue cabinet, and the AI parses that, identifies the heatsink from the video feed, and updates the database. That is the key, a natural language interface. The burden of inventory is the structure. You have to think like a database. But AI allows the database to think like a human. Daniel shouldn't have to navigate a menu tree. He should be able to just tell his house where he put his stuff.
And on the flip side, when he needs that LGA 1700 block, he should be able to ask his smart speaker or his phone, where is my water cooling gear, and have the system highlight the exact shelf, or even blink an LED on the bin. That is called pick-to-light, another professional warehouse technique. You can actually build a pick-to-light system using WLED and some cheap ESP32 microcontrollers. When you search for an item in Homebox, it sends a command to the LED strip on your shelf, and the specific bin lights up green.
I love Pick-to-Light. It makes you feel like you're living in the future. But I think we should also address the psychological aspect of this, because Daniel is hitting a wall at 5,000 items. When you have that many things, there is a tendency to keep things you do not need just because they are inventoried. It is a form of digital-enabled hoarding. Professional inventory managers have a concept called OSM, which stands for obsolete and slow moving. If an item hasn't been touched in 2 years, it is costing you money in storage, insurance, and cognitive load.
Oh, absolutely. The cost of storage isn't just the physical space, it is the mental tax of knowing it exists and having to manage it in your system. A pro tip for Daniel would be to set an expiration or a review date for niche parts. If that CPU block is still in the bin in 2028, it is probably for a socket that no one uses anymore. At that point, the AI should flag it and say, hey, you haven't touched this in 3 years. Do you want to list it on eBay or donate it to a local makerspace?
It is like the KonMari method for computer nerds. Does this voltage regulator spark joy? No, but it might spark a fire if I use it wrong. So, to recap for Daniel, we are looking at 3 main pillars of improvement. First, use AI for the intake. Stop typing. Use OCR and multimodal vision models to generate your descriptions and tags. Second, embrace the physical infrastructure of barcodes and QR codes. They are the permanent addresses of your stuff. Use license plate numbers for your bins so you never have to relabel. And third, adopt professional workflows like cycle counting and weight-based measurement for small parts.
I am curious about the hardware side again. Daniel mentioned his OnePlus Nord. If he is doing thousands of items, would a dedicated ruggedized scanner, like a Zebra or a Honeywell, be worth it? Those things are designed to scan 1,000 barcodes an hour without breaking a sweat.
For a home user, probably not unless he finds a cheap one on the used market. They can be expensive. But what he could do is use a Bluetooth ring scanner. They are these tiny little devices you wear on your finger, and they pair with your phone or computer. You keep your hands free to move the parts, and you just point your finger to scan the code. It is incredibly efficient. It makes you feel like a cyborg librarian. It removes that friction of having to pick up and put down your phone every single time.
A cyborg librarian on Agrippa Street. I love that image. But let's talk about the data itself. Daniel Ford Homebox into Where My Stuff. One of the risks of a large inventory is data lock-in. If he has 5,000 items in a database and that project stops being maintained, he is in trouble. He has all these QR codes that point to nowhere.
That is why open source is so critical here. Because Homebox uses a standard database structure, usually SQLite or PostgreSQL, Daniel owns his data. He should make sure he has a regular export routine that saves his inventory in a human-readable format, like a CSV or a JSON file. That way, even if the software disappears, his 250 hours of data entry labor are preserved. He can always import that into the next big thing.
Good point. Always keep the exit strategy in mind. I think we should also touch on the idea of shared inventory. Daniel is a digital consultant. If he has colleagues or friends in Jerusalem who also use these parts, a system like Homebox can actually be used to create a local mesh of resources. Imagine if you could search your friends' inventories for a specific part before ordering it from China.
That is the ultimate goal, a localized circular economy for makers. If I need a specific capacitor and I can see that Daniel has 10 of them 2 blocks away, that is a huge win for sustainability and speed. It turns a private hoard into a community library, but that requires everyone to have the same level of inventory discipline, which is a tall order. It starts with one person doing it well. If Daniel can prove that managing 5,000 items is feasible without it becoming a nightmare, others will follow. The AI tools are really the missing link here. They take the drudgery out of the organization.
They really do. I am actually getting excited just thinking about the metadata you could extract. Think about the searchability. Instead of searching for M3 screw, you could search for anything made of stainless steel that is longer than 10 millimeters. The AI can infer those properties from the photos and the descriptions, even if you didn't explicitly type them in. It gives you a level of insight into your own possessions that was previously impossible.
It is like having a personal assistant who has a photographic memory of every single thing you own. I think for Daniel, the next step is to look into some of the AI-powered OCR tools that can interface with the Homebox API. There are some great Python libraries that can do this. You could set up a folder on your computer where you just drop a photo, and a script automatically creates a draft entry in Homebox. He could even use a local LLM to avoid API costs if he has a powerful enough workstation.
And for the hardware side, he should definitely look into a high-quality thermal label printer. The cost of the labels is pennies, but the time saved in identification is massive. Also, he should consider the lighting of his intake area. If he is taking photos for AI to analyze, good lighting is the difference between an accurate identification and a hallucination. A simple LED ring light and a clean white background can make a huge difference.
Exactly. It is all about creating a standardized environment. In the warehouse world, we call this the pack station. It is where all the magic happens. If Daniel treats his intake like a professional pack station, he will find the process much more satisfying. It becomes a ritual rather than a chore. You sit down with your new parts, you scan, you weigh, you label, and you move on.
I think we have given him a lot to chew on. From AI-assisted intake to professional logistics workflows like cycle counting and license plating. It is a big shift from a hobbyist mindset to a professional one, but at 5,000 items you really do not have a choice. You either become a pro, or you get buried in your own stuff.
You either manage the inventory, or the inventory manages you, and I think Daniel is at the point where he is ready to take control. It is a lot of work up front, but the payoff is that moment where you need a specific niche part and you can put your hand on it in 15 seconds. That is a superpower. It changes the way you create. You are no longer limited by what you can find. You are only limited by what you have.
It really is. It is the closest thing we have to a real-life search function for the physical world. Well, this has been a fascinating dive into the world of parts management. I'm actually feeling inspired to go organize that hallway shelf now, Herman. Maybe I will even buy a thermal printer.
I will believe it when I see it, Corn. But I will help you. We can start by cycle counting the power adapters. I think I saw a 9-volt AC to AC adapter in there that belongs in a museum.
One step at a time. Before we wrap up, I want to say thanks to everyone for listening. This has been My Weird Prompts. If you have been enjoying our deep dives into the technical and the strange, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a rating or a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It genuinely helps the show reach more people who are interested in things like AI-powered home inventory and the philosophy of organization.
Yeah, it really does make a difference. And if you have your own weird prompts or a home lab setup that you are proud of, we want to hear about it. You can find us at myweirdprompts.com, where we have an RSS feed and a contact form. We love hearing about how people are using technology to solve these very human problems of clutter and complexity.
You can also reach us directly at show@myweirdprompts.com. We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much everywhere else you get your audio fix. We are always looking for new challenges, so send us your weirdest problems.
Thanks to Daniel for the prompt. It is a great reminder that even the most mundane tasks can be transformed by a little bit of clever engineering and some AI. It is about reclaiming your time and your space.
Absolutely. Until next time, I am Corn.
And I am Herman Poppleberry.
Thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.